we are very pleased to have two, I'm assuming, very, very busy people, to put it lightly. Jyoti Mehra, CHRO of Gilead Sciences, and Doug Shupinski, Head of Leadership Development at Merck. Today's conversation will be facilitated, as always, by our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to you, David. Are you there?
Thanks very much, Gabe. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sound perfect.
Excellent. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. Jyoti and Doug, thanks a lot for being here with us. We'll come to you in a few minutes. I want to chat for about 10 to 12 minutes, kind of share some updates, gather some data from people, and kind of lay some foundations. And then Jyoti will hear from you first as we explore what's happening over at Gilead, a very public organization right now with remdesivir. You guys even taught me how to say that. Thank you for that. And then Doug will come to you with Merck. And those of you who don't know, Merck are in the vaccine business. Who cared about that a few months ago? Now we seem to all care a lot about it. So we're going to hear a little bit about what's happening in that world. So thanks, both of you, for joining us. People have three questions usually when they meet me, especially if it's the first time. Firstly, my accent's Australian. Secondly, it's not a Zoom background. I'm in the woods in a house. Thirdly, I was born with this name, and I didn't make it up. It's great to be here with you. We want to, I want to just kind of place us a bit. I've called this leadership in unusual times. I think that's the nicest frame. It's not the new normal. I don't like that. It's a very unusual time. It's a once in 100-year experience. I want to just kind of anchor us a little bit. I think we're going through three different stages psychologically. The shock phase, which really is very much like physical shock, like falling down the stairs. The shock phase, where it's just absolutely overwhelming, is mostly passing. What we're now moving into is a stage that's very painful and likely to last a very long time, or maybe not, which would be great. But it's it's quite painful at the moment. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of moving parts. We're not sure what's going to happen, and then eventually there's going to be a kind of rehabilitation stage. In our organizations, we're trying to kind of predict what's happening. We had a fantastic session a couple of weeks ago from Amy Edmonston, who developed the concept of psychological safety, as well as Bob Johansson, who founded and really led the Institute for the Future. He had some fantastic thoughts on how to actually predict what's happening. If you, I think that one's up, Gabe, now isn't it, on the podcast? People can listen to that. He walked us through like how to actually think about the future better. He's the world's really leading futurist. But as we're sort of trying to work this out, it's like, where are we? But the theme that we keep seeing overall is for an organization, the way we see it is this is a lot about being able to think deeply. And we need to think deeply because it's incredibly complex and new and all that. And we can't think deeply when we're experiencing strong stress. And so we've been doing a lot of work with organizations on trying to help their managers and their employees kind of wrestle that stress back to manageable levels. That's been a lot of our work. We're doing a lot of briefings with organizations on kind of how do you wrestle threat back to a manageable level so that you can actually be really productive. Some of you have seen this framework. I actually want to ask you a question in a moment. Don't do it yet. We'll give you a poll. We'll put up a poll in a moment. But as I'm explaining this, if you haven't seen this, just see if you can kind of work out your threat level. We've been introducing this to a lot of organizations. It's a way of really getting some data and understanding and insight about how people are really doing. So basically in the brain, there are three different intensities of threat. Level one is kind of a broad sense that something could be dangerous, but you're still okay. And so you can do most work at level one threat. You can't do creative work well, but everything else you can do well, and some things you can do even better. It's like a strong cup of coffee, level one threat. Level two threat is your brain deciding a danger is close enough that you should prepare to actually fight or flight. And so all these systems kick in that really degrade perception, cognition, social cognition, creativity, and even degrade your immune system and all this other stuff. It's this sense that danger could be really imminent. And then level three threat is this very high cortisol, very high adrenaline, very high heart rate, from feeling like a danger is really here. And you can get that, level three, you can get that just from turning the TV on and seeing some headlines, and suddenly you're at that, very, very, very strong, agitated state. So there are these different threat levels, and normally in life we have toward states, which is the positive, and sometimes we dip to level one. Rarely do we dip to level two, but right now people are experiencing a lot stronger threat levels than normal. So we've been helping organizations kind of identify these levels and put in place individual practices called buffers to help you, and then practices at a team level called signals to help others. So I won't go far into that, but I really do want to actually gather some data, and we're going to publish something in the next week or so. And I've got 3 questions for you. The first one is, what threat level do you think your top leaders are? And I'll give you the framework again. Let's put that poll up. So level 3, so I'm talking about like your C-suite, maybe the top 100 if you're a big firm. So level 3 is like they hardly making any sense. Like they're really agitated. You can't get any sense out of them. Level 2 is like they're clearly anxious, not their normal self. Quite agitated. And level 1 is like, they're doing okay. They're still being pretty functional. So what level are your top leaders? And we'll ask a separate question in a moment about your, generally your people managers. So this is more your top leaders. I see we've got 200 folks. If you're not from an organization, no need to answer this, but if you are, we'd love your input on this question. You just need to press it. You don't need to press return or anything else. What level of threat are your top leaders? We'll give that another moment. We'll close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's close it off. We've got 270. And Gabe, I think people can see these results, right? People can see now what the data is.
Yep, they should be able to.
Fantastic. So what we've got here is actually one of the best results I've seen for a while. It seems to be getting slightly better. That's the good news, is that there are some neutral. There's 4% of people neutral to positive, right? That's good news. Only 52% at level 1. That's good news. Bad news, 44% are at level 2 or higher. That's really high. That's a lot. That's a lot of threat for a lot of leaders. So, it's progress, but it's still bad. I feel like suddenly I'm one of those briefings. That's the weather report. We're making slow but positive progress, but it's still really bad, on top leaders. Let's look at the next one. What about people managers on the next poll? So this is like your people managers. Now, if you don't have data, you have no idea, maybe don't answer it. But if you have data or access to it, or you have a sense of it, how your people managers are doing, we'd love to see what you think. How do you think your people managers are doing? And of course, it's an average. It's going to be different for different people. But what level of threat are your people managers, different to your top leaders? Again, level 3 is the strongest, highly alert, highly alarmed. Level 2 is highly alert, somewhat alarmed. So we'll give you a moment to click that. Again, no need to press return, just press the button there. See if we can get a few more of those. We can get a quick click here. All right, we'll close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great, let's close it off. So we've got nearly 250 people voted. Here we see actually a similar result. So that's interesting. Sometimes that's been different, sometimes it's been similar, but a similar result, 54%. It's a slightly worse result for sure than before. Similar but slightly worse than top leaders, and that's to be expected. What's the next one? Let's do the next poll. Finally, it's the last one. Whoops. What about your frontline employees? What are your frontline employees? How are they doing? So frontline employees dealing with customers from home, not from home, either way. What's your sense of their threat level? And if level 0 just means neutral or positive. So anything that's sort of neutral or positive, you would put as a 0 for the sake of this one. Let's get lots of people clicking that. If you know or you have a sense of how your frontline are, either you've got data or you've got a sense of it from lots of conversations. Let's give you another, we'll close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's close it off. Great, thank you. We've got 237 voted. Okay, now we see 75% at level 2 or 3. Okay, so that's the trend. We've been seeing this trend every week. The front line are doing a lot worse. And what I want to suggest also, and it's a hypothesis, I don't have data yet on this, but my hypothesis is the front line is actually doing worse than we think on average, because people don't want to let on that they're doing badly with the job insecurity. And also people are just bad at asking for help generally. Humans generally feel really anxious, uncomfortable, guilty, asking for help at the best of times, never mind in a crisis. So I think people are not asking for help. They're not speaking up. They're not raising their voice. And I think overall frontline employees are probably, in a much worse place on average than we realize. So This is, thanks very much for everyone willing to share that. Appreciate that a lot. We've been gathering a lot of data, and we'll put out some points of view in the next week or so. This is what we're seeing in the talent space overall. Just a couple of comments. People are doing incredible work to ensure physical safety, and people have been, like in 48 hours getting everyone safe, and, the most heroic efforts. A good number of companies, a surprising number of companies, are deeply considering psychological safety, which is really threat level, right? Psychological safety is no more than level 1 threat. They're trying to help people feel safe. They're doing a lot. I'm just going to say they're not doing enough though. On average, across, I think we've had a couple of thousand data points. On average, the frontline employees are really, really stressed is what we're seeing. So they are deeply considering it, but we don't think they're doing anywhere near enough. We are seeing a big focus on growth mindset and inclusion. That's been a big theme, and I think companies are really thinking about that, as well as just, how do we help people focus? And there's organizations are pausing many sacred cows. They're saying, actually, you know what? We're not going to do the 360 this time. We're not going to do the talent processes. We're not going to do the performance management process. We're just going to focus people on monthly goals. So some changes. And finally, before we go to Jyoti, just one big thing that I'm seeing. I love this quote. It's not my quote. I think it's from Rahm Emanuel. It's been said probably by leaders for centuries. Never let a good crisis go to waste. We are seeing, as people move into the middle stage out of shock, we're seeing organizations going, wow, we did incredible things. How do we keep some of that? We did incredible things in terms of speed and agility and caring about people. And so can we use this time to redefine our culture? Can we use this time to throw out some old practices, build some new ones? Guess what? Your culture isn't embedded in your building. Your culture is embedded in shared everyday habits, as we define it. So could we use the opportunity to redefine it, before we come back? Secondly, organizations are saying, hey, we need to really reinvent leadership development, given it has to be virtual, and learning. Given we kind of have to, this could be an opportunity to really reshape it for the new era. And do we completely want to overhaul performance management in this crisis? So just a quick poll, the last one, if we could put that up, Gabe and Anna, are any of the, just if you could click, if one of these three things are a key priority in your organization, are you using the crisis to change any of these? We'd love to, if you are, just click on one of those. We'd love to know. So we're really curious about kind of how people are seeing this. But we are seeing a lot of companies saying, actually, we really want to use this crisis for some long-term good. And I think we're starting to move into a phase to be able to do that. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for doing that. We'll give that another moment. Either redefining your culture, reinventing leadership development and learning, or transforming performance management. Who's doing that? Who's using the opportunity for that? All right, lots of people. Let's slow down. So let's close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. Thanks very much. Wow, half of the folks who responded, which is 187, half of you, about 100 people, are really reinventing leadership and learning. That's a good thing. We've got a ton of research showing that the way we generally do leadership development in companies is incredibly inefficient and can be massively more effective and more scalable. All right, let's wrap that up. I'm going to go to Jyoti. Thank you very much, everyone, for this polls and kind of staying with me there. Jyoti, do you want to join me here? And we'll have a conversation. And I have to kick off with just saying thank you for everything that you're doing there over at Gilead Sciences, and thank you for making time for us, given what an incredible situation you guys are in, and how public as well. I know you look after all of people and talent at Gilead, and thank you for training me how to say remdesivir as well. Last time we connected, that was great. But just thanks for everything that you're doing, and how are you guys doing over there? What's the vibe over at Gilead?
David, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me join this morning with the colleagues from all over the world, and a very warm morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I see you all are joining us from different parts of the world. So delighted to be connected with you, and it is. We are here at Gilead, we are filled with pride. Gilead, as many of you know, is a biotech company, life science company that is really a leader in the antiviral space. And we are feeling like we're very fortunate that we're in a position to really explore our investigational drug remdesivir, as David talked about, and really be an ability to bring that out to the communities and to the patients. So our teams are working incredibly hard. People that are on remdesivir ever since the outbreak of this crisis and pandemic at the beginning of the year, they have been heads down, really thinking about what more can we do scientifically. And those teams that are not working on remdesivir are really coming to support these teams by, helping in all other ways possible. So it's been terrific. Our purpose, our core purpose of why we exist and the work that we do has never been more clear and more true. So really, it's a great sense of pride and a privilege to lead this organization.
Thanks. That's great to hear. How do you think the threat levels have been in the organization? What's your sense of that? Yeah, how are people doing?
Yeah, so it's really, much like many of our other organizations, right? The organizations that you'll come from, it's an evolving situation, I would say. And David, you had joined us, just a few weeks ago, where we did much like this, an online poll where we really pulsed the organization to understand where they were. And I would say mostly level 1 and 2, but it's shifting and evolving rapidly. I also think that now that we're getting ready to at least plan the return to site, we're not calling it return to work, return to site. I think we're seeing some anxieties, go up, and the psychological safety and a lot of what you were talking about is beginning to play out as well. So I would say it's shifting, but mostly in the level 1 or 2. And of course, you were also talking about some frontline workers. So we have those of our colleagues that are on physically location dependent role in manufacturing or in the research part of the organizations. And they certainly are at the front of
Right.
Our mission, but also at the front of, exposure to the possibilities of this threat.
Right. It's interesting, threat level isn't really about like how much you have to do and how scary things are. It actually, a lot of it is about also, is it in the service of something important, and do you feel some control? And, you can actually like do something really scary and really difficult and work incredibly hard and still only have level 1 threat if you feel if it's for a greater good and you actually, have a sense of control and kind of sense of what's going on. And I think, your folks, when I connected with you last, working incredibly hard. And on one level, they should be really threatened, but actually, I think the shared goal that you have there and the power of that shared goal, right? Which also raises their sense of status and their sense of fairness and the sense of relatedness, right? With the shared goal and even a little bit of certainty. I think that shared goal really buffers people a lot.
It really does, and our opportunity is, as our teams are rising to this challenge, right? We are continuing from a human capital perspective. We're trying to think about how do we support and deeply care for our employees, and that looks differently for different people. So that's part of what we are really trying to constantly think about.
Yeah, no, for sure. And folks on the line, you can put things in the chat, by the way, if there's questions you want to ask. I'm going to chat with Jyoti for a while, and then I'll also keep an eye on kind of your questions or comments. But I just think just a quick final thing on that, Jyoti, there's actually research on that. When you are with people and have shared goals, you literally can take higher amounts of pain before it becomes overwhelming. There's all sorts of research on that. So I think the sense of, shared purpose isn't just like just a psychological thing. It actually has physiological benefits to people in immune system and threat level and, all these things. Someone actually just asked a question that was exactly what I wanted to ask you. What's been sort of most helpful? I know you've done lots of different things to help people. What do you think has been most helpful for people to sort of feel looked after and to help them with the psychological safety part, I guess? What's been most helpful?
So maybe I'll talk about 3 things and then I'll answer your question head on. So, the three areas that we have focused on is, first of all, listening to our employees. There is just something about everybody's going through this situation in their own ways. Well, first of all, everybody is impacted by it, right? So, there is a universality to how we as human beings are affected by this, but really listening deeply. And early on in the early stages of the crisis, we were actually getting ready to do things like our global employee survey. We were getting ready to, do some big cultural initiative. And we sort of paused it and we said, obviously, people don't have the headspace right now to think about these things. And then very quickly, and to the credit of my team, they said, well, this is even more important a time that we listen deeply to our employees, right? So yes, we're not doing, the standard 25-minute, 50-question global employee survey. At the same time, how might we quickly get a pulse for where the organization is. So I would say listening to employees has been an important component of our strategy. Offering support and caring deeply has been the second component, I would say. And this looks in terms of, the cadence of communication that we have tried to build, right? To give transparency and clarity to employees, the tools and resources. One of the things we found out earlier on in this crisis is there is a vast reservoir of resources that is available to all of us. Right. So the challenge is not information. The challenge is how do we curate that information,
right. It's a curation challenge, yeah.
Position it to the best of, the goals that we're trying to have. And then the third thing is, because, a lot of our employees started to say, how can we be part of giving back to our communities? And of course we have, our mission and core purpose is true, but we very quickly thought about what are ways in which we can find opportunities for our employees to give back to our communities. So I would say those three were the key components. On the HR side, our HR function, much like all the other organizations, is really at the forefront of providing the support. So even with the HR function, we got quickly into the cadence of weekly HR briefings in 2 time zones to cover our global, HR function. And that has also gone a long way in terms of preparing, the team that ultimately supports, our employees and leaders across the organization.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, just want a quick couple of comments on those 3 things. Firstly, the listening deeply. I mean, if people ask me what's the one most important thing that leaders have to do, it's actually deep empathy right now. And they have to have more empathy than they've ever probably had to have, right? And yeah. I know we had Deb Bubb from IBM a couple of weeks back. She was saying that the first thing their top leaders did was actually take their teams through their homes and say, this is my partner, this is my dog, this is my vegetable garden, like really humanize themselves to kind of bring themselves off the pedestal they're normally on and just like, create that real human connection and really build that empathy. And I think that's such an important thing. And I think a lot of leaders have struggled with that. And a lot of leaders have been surprisingly amazing with that as well. We've heard that from organizations. But, if you have a hostage taker, it's an unfortunate metaphor, but, like literally the way they train you to deal with, a hostage crisis is listen to that person more deeply than they've ever been listened to. And it turns out like really feeling heard deeply calms the nervous system and activates reward centers. So it's such a big one. Various levels and surprises have been happening. It is, on the second point, it is a curation challenge more so than here's resources, right? And we've seen that, we've been leaning into try to work out just the right habits to help people focus. And it's such a curation challenge of what's the one thing to do? And it turns out you can't actually be prescriptive. People actually are quite different in different places. Yeah. So you sort of got to give people some certainty of a few things, but then autonomy. And then finally on the giving back, and I'll come back to you at the giving back, it's doing things to help others is actually one of the most rewarding things you can do. If you've got some resources, it really calms the nervous system, especially if you're isolated and feel really disconnected. Giving back to others is a deeply rewarding experience in terms of the brain. So any comments to add there?
I was just I agree with you, David. And just 2 comments on listening deeply. One of the things that we are also thoughtful about is, what do you really do with that listening, right? Sometimes you need to listen, right? Which is really important. We're not making long action plans based on, what people are necessarily feeding back. However, we are making tweaks, in the first pulse that we did, it was clear that people were looking for more support from their managers. So we put in place, these people manager forums where we're really providing our people managers with very specific, forum, a structured way in how they can support their employees. And then the second point around, caring deeply and offering support, this is not about treating all employees in a consistent way. We had a very segmented approach and thinking about how do you think about physically location dependent roles, because their needs are different. How do you think about people that are working from home? How do you think about people that are, struggling with productivity challenges because of their children being at home? So it was a very segmented approach in how we are trying to offer care for our employees. And honestly, that is heartfelt by the leadership teams.
Oh, that's fantastic. Actually, that leads me to a question that someone's asking, how have you been listening to employees? What kind of mechanisms have you been using to kind of gather data? What tips or guidance can you share with folks here?
Yeah, so it's probably not rocket science, but we are doing it both, both electronically and also virtually. So we have, every week we are trying to reach anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 employees through the different forums that we have set up. So that's a pretty large number, and not the same group of employees comes to those forums. But what we have done is we've launched something called the Staying Connected initiative, and that's really in partnership with our public affairs team. It has everything to do with, staying connected with our teams, staying connected with, the communities, staying connected with each other. So we have, just to give you a few examples, we have set up these virtual, staying connected coffee with leaders where, two of the leadership team members meet with around 100 employees every week. And we've tried to keep the numbers relatively small compared to our employee size, because we want those conversations to be intimate. So we have those sort of forums. We have forums like, what we call our Gilead live event. Actually, that's the event that David had joined us for, where it's an all employee meeting where we get an external thought leader, an expert, to really come and talk about topics that are really at the front of people's minds. So we do those. We also have, things like Yammer, Microsoft Teams. Those are ways in which we're using to connect virtually. But we're also emphasizing, pick up the phone and talk to your colleagues, right? So there is something about, Zoom is wonderful and lovely, but I think like many of you, we're also experiencing Zoom fatigue. So if employee needs to take like a day off Zoom so that they don't always have to be, visually present for each conversation, it may actually help you get them mentally more present with you. So those are some of the ways in which we're thinking about this.
Oh, that's great. Being really flexible. Some great ideas. I know IBM, when we had Bob, she was talking about the work from home pledge that they developed, which you can find if you just Google IBM work from home pledge. In fact, one of my team will probably put it in the chat now, but it's a wonderful kind of set of statements about kind of really accepting individual variation, accepting some people won't be able to go on camera some days, accepting, the kids and the dogs and the, like there's this wonderful sort of human acceptance that's happening. And I hear that from you guys. Someone's asked me a question that people keep asking, and I forgot to answer it early. So it's in people's queues. It's not a boat. It's not a church. I'm just in a house in the woods and upstate New York. And it's just a beautifully architect design home that rented for some months to be out of the city. But speaking of architecture, like what have what have you been doing to help people managers, and what do you think has been most effective with supporting, and what have you curated, I guess, that's been most effective for helping your people managers?
Yeah, so there were three things, David, that we heard in the early days of the crisis, and we are continuing to hear some of it, but it's evolved to different topics, right? So the three things we heard is from employees is, am I going to have a job? How are my goals going to be looked at, right, as we get through the remainder of the year, and how can I be most productive, right? So those were sort of the three things that they were asking us, or they were looking to get support on. So those were the three anchors that we used with our people managers. As I was saying, we've put a people manager forum every couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks actually. We have a frequency of getting together with our people managers. The first session we did with them was just setting the fundamentals of acknowledging where we are at, right? And with the goal that they should be doing the same with their teams, but giving them a framework to be able to do that. The second one we did was actually where, David, you had joined us, right? Where we gave them a common vocabulary. And the thing about people managers is, as we said, everybody's situation is so unique and different. However, when you introduce a consistent frame on how to think about these issues, it gives the teams a common vocabulary to talk about it, right? I mean, it's one of the things, David, you and I had talked about when we did our Gilead Live event. Some of us don't know what to call the situation, right? The situation that we're in right now. So giving them a common vocabulary, also giving them permission, right? At the end of the day, they're also human beings. So giving them permission to say, I may not have been, as empathetic in that last conversation, but how do I have time to self-reflect and then move that forward? Right. Creating a bit of a community amongst them has also been some of the goals and objectives. And then the last thing I would say is this month we're really moving into as we have, again, much like all organizations, we've moved to virtual onboarding, virtual hiring, virtual summer internship, all of those have sort of virtual offboarding. So a lot of those things have been put into place, but we are using that as a way to build capabilities of our people managers. So they wanted to understand, how best can they do virtual interviewing. So we are going to use that concept, but we will also take this opportunity to broaden and talk about, how to best select talent, and then put a specific measure around virtual interviewing, and then obviously performance management as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. That's great. I saw a piece in the New York Times this week from a Gallup survey that 60% of employees want to keep working from home. I don't want to box you in a corner and make you say something that you get in trouble with there, but do you have a sense of sort of how you're going to think about that going forward?
Yeah, so this is where, our teams are really putting the heads together with employees actually to think about it. What we have again, we have, like many companies, have a workplace flexibility policy and guideline. We call it G-Flex. We're very much looking to expand it and think about, what the next iteration of that is. And I'd be very interested to know what, to hear from Doug and other companies, how they're thinking about it. I do think that it'll look different, right? I'm not sure, and this is my view as an individual, not necessarily as a Gilead HR professional. I'm not sure that we will go to, everybody working from home all the time. I do think that it'll be somewhat of a hybrid, right? Which, by the way, has its own challenges. So I think we have to think about, right now it feels very synchronous because everybody, for the most part, more than 85% of our employees are working from home. So it's very synchronous. But when you get into this hybrid situation, where the one or two colleagues are the only ones in a team meeting that are working through Zoom, it does require different skills and capabilities. So we are trying to foreshadow. The workplace flexibility is certainly top of mind. I do think that it'll get expanded. What it will look like is something we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be actually more complex in some ways as we get to it, right? It's going to be sort of more difficult because right now it's like, oh yeah, everyone's at home. We know where they are and how to, interact with them. When we worked with BlackRock some years back on mitigating bias, we have a big practice on bias mitigation. We've done some with you guys, I know, but one of the things they noticed is distance bias. Is really big in teams where you have some in the office and some at home, and they put in practice as a sort of experiment at the time that, if you have a virtual meeting and anyone's not in the room, then everyone's not in the room. Everyone's on their own individual Zoom. And they actually found it incredibly productive. It addressed the whole inclusion issue. It addressed the bias issue in terms of distance bias. And, they actually found it a great practice. We might find some organizations experimenting with that. Like, oh, actually, we're going to have Zooms if so that people don't feel left out and weird and, all of that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did, because we're a global organization, even before, going in the last couple of years, as we have global colleagues that sometimes join us by phone, sometimes by video, but when they join us by phone, we actually put a place card with their name around the table, just as a way to recognize that they're very much part of the conversation, even though you can't see them.
Yeah, no, thanks. And just to close off before we wrap up, what's been most inspiring? What's been most inspiring in terms of what leaders are doing or employees are doing? What's been most inspiring for you through this crisis at Gilead?
Yes, I think for us at Gilead, but probably for many of us, for us, our guiding principle in this is what is our responsibility to the community, to the patients, and to the people. Gilead has long-standing been a company that follows science, right? We bring therapeutics. We are in the business of really, helping save lives, improve lives. So one, the concept of people putting the larger purpose before their personal concerns has been deeply, deeply inspiring, right? At so many levels. And second, I think it's inspiring to see, how we are responding to our responsibility, both externally and internally.
Right.
And in a very real, authentic way. I mean, I think this is hard to make up, right? You can't really pretend to care. And what's been really great to see here at Gilead is the true sense of care, the deep listening, the not only saying that we feel responsible, but our actions are supporting that sense of responsibility, and constantly thinking about how can we try to see around the bend. The challenge with this crisis is nobody knows what's going to really happen. So, how can we move with speed, but how can we try to offer support in the broadest way possible while trying to make it as personalized as possible? So it's really a privilege.
That's great. And what's coming up for me is I think the organization shines a light on companies' true values, not their stated values. I think we start to see leaders' actual values in a crisis, and the people who, say they're caring, but then haven't been on camera ever, a month later. It's like, okay, I see, so I think it's really shining a light on organizations' real values and individuals, real values. And it's kind of hard to hide from them, in this world. And I think, from what I've seen from Gilead, you guys have, just doing incredible work and have such a pro-social set of values there about helping others that's, intrinsic to everyone. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everything that you're doing, both with remdesivir and everything else. And really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And I think you inspired a ton of people. So stay with us. I know you have to jump off before the end, but stay with us if you can to hear from Doug. Thanks very much again.
Thanks, David. I'm looking forward to hearing from Doug, and for everybody out there, hang in there. We're going to come out of this stronger on the other side for sure. So
we are absolutely. Thanks so much, Jyoti. So Doug, great to have you. So we heard from Jyoti, who, their organizations about, reducing the risk if bad things happen, but you guys are in the vaccine business, right? We really want to hear from you. Like, is it next week? Is the week after? Maybe 3 weeks from now, we're going to have a handle? Where are we? That's the feeling out there. Everyone's so impatient, but how are things over at Merck? Tell us the high level, how are people doing?
So a couple of things. First of all, when I agreed to be on here, I didn't know, and I wasn't told I was going to have to follow Jyoti, because if that had been the case, I don't know. I mean, she was pretty awesome. Clearly, I'm in no position to make any public statements around our work with vaccines, of course, but we are one of the few organizations, one of the few companies that does vaccine research. Suffice it to say, developing a vaccine is extremely complicated. It's not nearly as straightforward as maybe a pharmaceutical product. And so know that we are putting efforts in that direction. One of the things our CEO, Ken Frazier, had said recently, and I shared this with you, David, offline, was when we have substantive information to share with the public, with the media, we will do so, and probably not before that. So hopefully stand by and hear with what we're doing. So
yeah, no, thanks. We're excited to talk to you, and obviously we can't talk the science of vaccines here. That would be a very bad idea, but we can talk the science of helping humans get through this. And I know you lead leadership development, and you've had a huge impact on the way that close to 100,000 people have been learning and what they've been learning, all sorts of things. Tell me about what do you think has been helping people the best? In terms of the people practices at Merck, what's been helping people the most? What's been kind of most useful?
I would say in NLI fashion, I think of three things to keep to that theme. First of all, and I don't think any of this is earth-shattering, but I think it's worth reinforcing and acknowledging. The first would be the communication that we have from all levels of leadership, certainly from our CEO, but also from that individual that's most personal to you as an employee, and that's your next level manager. It's the frequency of the communication, the substance of it, the honesty of it. I think Merck has done a great job of acknowledging what we know, and at the same time saying there are some things we don't really know how this is going to go. And I think people appreciate that acknowledgement that we don't have all of the answers. So that would be the first one. The second would be the willingness to be flexible. The organization has said, obviously, not just with working from home, but the way people are either needing or choosing to work. There are healthcare issues. There are childcare issues. Everybody has their own unique scenario. And I think Merck as an organization has been really patient and tolerant and accepting in the way that they've allowed people to manage their own situation. And the third is, so things have been taken away. We have a lot of people that are in the manufacturing world or in the research world that, you can't put your Petri dish in your briefcase and take it home with you. You have to be in the lab to do things. And some of those people are, and some of those people aren't. And so what do we do with our time? These are Merck people, I know, just like Gilead people, I'm certain they are high performers. They are drivers. And to sit at home for some people is absolutely maddening. They want to contribute. They want to get things done. So one of the, and it's not the full answer, please understand, but one of the parts of the solution is offering access to developmental options that people have. And so we have really redoubled and quadrupled our efforts to get people access to resources and information and whatever it might be that's going to allow them to feel as if they're not just wasting time sitting for something to happen. They're actually developing themselves.
That's an interesting point, actually. I might dig into that because we've seen that as a trend. We've seen that at NLI with people signing up for things. We normally get like 100 people on an event. Now we have 1,000.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff. And you're seeing it, just in Facebook with, people learning to cook this and study this, and everyone's using the time. I think it's actually a good thing. Some companies have been like pausing learning, pausing leadership development. What's your position on, say, leadership development and kind of how you're supporting folks with developing themselves through this crisis?
So it's modifying not so much what we do, but how we do it. So right. Some things, obviously, we're not running any live training. That's just not
good job.
An option right now. So in some cases, I think it does make sense to pause some major learning initiatives that we have. We do have some programs. We have some key talent programs where we bring people in from around the world. And maybe it doesn't make sense to run them completely as we had. So we're modifying the context of those programs, the length of the programs, obviously the manner, the modalities in which they're delivered. We're managing those things. And I think one of I saw it in a 2-day strategy meeting that our L&D organization held just this week. I think looking down the road, what we're going to really, the trick is going to be when we come out of this, whenever that is, what do we keep in terms of things we've been doing differently? And we say, that's not going to be a temporary solution. That's going to be a permanent solution or offering, but not everything we've put into place from an interim perspective should stay in place. So I think we need to be cautious in not saying, well, it worked during the quarantine crisis, so obviously we should keep it in place forevermore. I think that's going to be the interesting time when we can start coming out of this.
Right. I mean, tell us, you just give us your early hunches. We won't hold you to this, but give us your early hunches. What's been surprising in terms of like works really well around, leadership and learning? What's been that you're hoping to keep and maintain?
Well, I'm glad to say you're not going to hold me to it, because I also said the Beatles would never make it. So, you have to be cautious in taking what I say. I believe, so I think if you can imagine this grid or this chart where virtual learning or not just learning, everything, meetings and working from home virtually, you saw this gradual upward movement on that graph over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years. I think you're going to see this inflection point that occurred in the first quarter of 2020 that will cause that acceptance with virtual interactions and perceived effectiveness and willingness to experiment with. So I think you're going to see some return to, and I think Jyoti had referenced this, some return to a large degree of people coming into a place to work. But I think there's going to be more of it's okay to work from home if you don't have a need to come in. I think our classroom programs, people are not just going to say, well, we're okay with virtual sessions. I think people are going to potentially demand that things be done virtually, because we're seeing that I think you get such a large percentage of the benefit in a virtual solution as you do to a live solution, and you walk away from a lot of the financial or logistical or administrative aspects that make face-to-face classroom programs challenging. Is you don't have to own all of those, but you still get most of the benefit.
Yeah, you get most of the benefits, but you get this huge ability to scale and globally, and this incredible opportunity for speed as well.
Yeah.
Now you can hit 95,000 people in the same month with something. So it might only be the way we think about it as well, maybe it's only 80% as good, but I can now hit like everyone, fast. Whereas in the past, I can hit like a third of my population in 2 years, Now I can hit 100% of my population in a quarter, and it's only 80% as good. Here's the thing that I've noticed though, and we've been collecting data on this, when you get virtual right, actually it's better than workshops. We've actually got hard data from like the same exact program run virtually versus workshops, looking at people a month later, how many people are activating the right habits. And the virtual actually wins hands down completely. And so we have a lot of biases around kind of, everything has to be workshops. It's true, virtual can be awful. Virtual can do nothing. So can workshops. But I think when done right, virtual has incredible potential. You want to speak to that? So your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, you are talking to Mr. Biased against virtual as of a number of years ago. I started into the L&D business and specifically leadership development, 25 years ago. And I started as a facilitator. That was, I loved being in the classroom. That was my energy. And so that perspective, that bias was very hard to change. And it started, I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago, when our group was placed in a position, again, both from a budget perspective and from a scaling perspective. And the word came out that this whole idea of wait lists, we're going to get good stuff to a fraction of the people because that's what we can, number one, afford to do. And number two, we can reach them. That's not going to work. We need to scale this virtually. And so I went kicking and screaming, again, these 5 or 6 years ago. And I've come to realize that the smaller pieces of learning that are followed with a reflection time and application time, and then you come back and you process maybe it's a few days later, maybe it's a week later, you come back and you process what you learned and what you applied, and then took it to the next step. I absolutely agree with you, David, that I think there are significant advantages to virtual that are not offered in putting someone into a classroom for a day or two.
Yeah.
That being said, I still believe classroom will always have a place. I just don't think it's as dramatic of a place as potentially it used to be.
Yeah, no, we've got a ton of data on this. We started down this path about 8 years ago when we were doing learning research. We developed the AGES model. I think you've seen that. It looks at the 4 conditions that has to be high for learning to stick: attention, generation, emotion, spacing. It turns out workshops, stuff in person, you actually get low attention after a couple of hours, right? Because the generation's very high, the emotions can be very high, but you get almost zero spacing. And the research is clear, you actually need all 4 of those conditions very high for maximal retention. And the spacing effect has some big surprise benefits to it. So I think there's, we started sort of rethinking and challenging ourselves. The first time we did something completely virtual, we just completely followed the science and did something that we had no idea if it would work. But we sort of did it as a pilot. It looked like it shouldn't do anything at all, and it did incredible things. And we just kind of followed the science of, if you can get people to care and get their attention, right? If you can get people to care and you can get them to have insights and you can get them to do that with others at the same time, and then you can do that over time, actually some magic happens. Those are the conditions, get them to care, pay attention, get them to have insights, get them to do that and have conversations with each other and keep doing that week to week. It's remarkable. So I believe we can take a leadership development program of any intensity and actually make it better virtually, not accounting for also cheaper, faster, and all that. We're starting to think about that. But it's interesting that it's going to be an interesting time. I mean, you guys have people in many, many parts of the world, I know, and some, all sorts of different experiences. Tell me what's been most inspiring to you in this time as we kind of think about the road ahead? What are you kind of optimistic about and hopeful about, or kind of inspired about as you look ahead and look across the globe and your people everywhere?
So I consider myself extremely fortunate, and I think almost everyone at Merck does as well, because of the nature, and Jyoti had talked about this at Gilead, what it is, the mission of Merck, what our organization does. It's almost impossible to not be connected to and motivated by that mission, and knowing that every day you come in and you're saving people's lives. We are literally curing cancer or trying to address that disease, and everything that we do in terms of improving lives and saving lives. So when you see people, I made reference to this earlier, people are just chomping at the bit to get the opportunity to do their part,
right,
to address, and not just address the situation, the COVID situation, that's clearly at the forefront of everyone's minds. But as is sometimes the case, we're not losing sight for the fact that there are millions of people that have cancer, that have heart disease, that have cholesterol issues, that whatever it might be, those people still need the products and the services that address their conditions. And there is no one at Merck that's kind of throwing up their hands and saying, well, you know, good luck to them. There is this constant focus and almost an obsession on the part of Merck employees to say, not only do we need to address this COVID thing, but we need to continue to accomplish the mission that we've been accomplishing for all of these years. And to see people just, you know, I learned a long time ago, pressure doesn't build character, pressure reveals character. And,
right.
and you see the character of the typical Merck employee. And it could be everyone from the operator on the shop floor to the chemist that's on the research bench to, you know, the first line leader. And it's just really cool to see people putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Right.
So that's what's inspiring to me.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, similar to Jyoti from Gilead, I think there's incredible prosocial, there's an incredible sort of vein of prosocial motivation inside your organization. And I think people intrinsically, naturally want to be of service, right? Want to help. And then when a crisis comes along, that just comes to the fore even more.
Yeah, it's nice to see that it's not just platitudes that our company has been. Not that I ever thought it was, but this has certainly proven that what we've been saying, it's legit.
Yeah, I think I want to write about that, how a crisis reveals a company's true character. I think it's a theme that I'm starting to see. Anyone has any comments about that in the chat, love to see. Just, you know, are you seeing that as well? Are you seeing that? You know, does pressure, you know, show character? I guess lots of people have talked about that in the armed services and other things, but I think it's something that we're starting to see as a society. What words of wisdom would you have for people thinking about what should they do with leadership and learning? Any sort of closing comments? What words of wisdom would you have as a veteran in that space?
Yeah, I would say meet people where they are. Understand that this is an opportunity from both a leadership development as well as an L&D and a people management perspective. I think about one example back in World War II, when in the U.S., when so many men went overseas to fight, and you had women go into the workforce. The Rosie the Riveter, if you recall that character. And when the men came back from war, the women were kind of like, we now realize what our power is and what our potential is, and we're not willing to relinquish that power and potential that we've now come to know that we have. I think you're going to find that the average person realizes that they have capabilities, they have influences that they didn't necessarily either realize that they had or weren't able to bring to bear. And I think if anyone thinks that the typical approach to leadership, the typical approach to L&D is going to come back in 3 or 6 months, I don't think that's correct. So I think go with the flow, take what you've been given as an L&D and a leadership development professional as benefits to this, and make it work in your favor, because there are a lot of positive things.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. We did a poll recently. We've been running events for folks in talent, smaller events, and I know some people were asking in the chat, like, how can we learn more about kind of designing learning that's even better and stuff. We you know, just drop us a line if you're interested in smaller group events. If you're from an organization, we've been talking a lot, and one of the we talk a lot about kind of what people are doing with learning. We saw 50% of people are using the opportunity to radically reinvent their like leadership development strategy, radically, both content and process. And I think it's a really important thing. I think there's a huge opportunity to radically reinvent, you know, what we do for leadership development and learning right now. Starting with like reinventing leadership, you know, what does it really mean to be a leader now in this environment? How much flexibility do you need? How much empathy do you really need? How much pro-social stuff do you need? So I think we're going to see new models of leadership and new models of kind of developing leaders, and we're super psyched about that. Doug, thanks so much for joining us. I've got some closing comments. Feel free to stay on or jump off, but we really, really appreciate your insights there. I think just in the end there, we had a bunch of people having some big insights about what's possible here. Thanks for your inspiring comments.
I appreciate the invitation, David.
Yeah, no, great to have you with us, and I appreciate the ongoing partnership there as well. Let's do a couple of resources I want to share before we wrap up. We just started something this week. It's kind of an experiment. I don't know if we'll keep doing it, but we're going to do an experiment. We want to look at your entire learning strategy, leadership development, learning, and give you a free audit. Some of my team are in the background going, what? David's just done what? But we actually want a bunch of organizations to call us or email us or whatever and say, actually, we'd love you to look over our learning strategy and advise us. So we're doing free consulting, free advising on kind of ways that your whole learning strategy could be much, much better in a virtual world, leadership development and more broadly. So drop us a line if you're interested in that. In fact, there's a poll coming up. You can just click that one and someone will reach out to you. We're also doing free C-suite briefings on how to lead through crisis. So we've been doing lots of those. I think we're up to 30 or 40 top team CEOs and top teams that we're actually briefing on what does it take to lead through crisis. We're doing those. If it's a bigger solution, like we're briefing all your people managers, that tends to be something we charge for. But for the C-suites, we're doing a lot of those. We're also doing a lot of reinventing culture, learning, or performance work, a lot of consulting. We have a big solution called Focus. If you're from an organization and you want to check that out, we can give you a free place. We have an open enrollment program, but we're helping companies build habits at scale around greater focus, inclusion, growth mindset. And we have an open enrollment program for Focus. We can give you a space in if you're from an organization. We're also doing a lot of custom habit activation strategies at scale. So we're working with organizations to build some very specific strategies that build very specific habits across 100,000 people. So we're helping organizations that way. Just click one of those to help us know kind of if there's a way we can help you and support you in any way. We're also, Doug was mentioning individual learning. We've got a ton of people signing up for our brain-based coaching right now. Also, a certificate in the Foundations of NeuroLeadership, which is a fantastic 6-month program. And we're doing some weekly talent leader events as well. So just in closing, thank you so much to Jyoti and Doug for being here, for inspiring us all to think differently. I really appreciate your comments. Thanks to Gabe and the rest of the team for putting this together. Join us, next Friday. I think we have something on learning. We're going to go a deeper dive into learning, and we have next week, in fact, the head of talent and learning from Comcast and Ford, the CLO from Ford, who are actually doing some incredible work through this crisis. So we'll have Ford and Comcast next week, Friday at noon, if you can join us then as well. So thanks very much. Take care of yourselves. Look after each other. Keep doing what matters. And Gabe, back to you. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, David. And let me echo the thanks to Jyoti and Doug. Just a fantastic session today. And thanks, of course, to all of you for attending and bringing your insights to light on Zoom and on LinkedIn Live and YouTube. It's so great to see everybody interacting with each other. And just a great session today. Gilead and Merck, both being pharma companies, it's great to see the mutual respect and the shared kind of pro-social goals that they have getting us out of this thing and keeping us healthy. So I know we're at top of the hour here. A couple quick reminders before we let you go. If you need to drop, of course, please do so at your leisure. But for those remaining, if you'd like to watch this webinar again or share with colleagues, a recording will be made available by end of business today. And if you're on LinkedIn Live, Mary Grace can drop a form for you in the comments there, and you can sign up, and we'll make sure you get that email. And in that email, you can respond to her directly and explore deeper conversations with client advisors. As David mentioned, your Brain at Work Live continues Fridays at noon Eastern Time. The next Friday's episode is Never Let a Good Crisis Go to Waste, sort of the theme David was bringing up earlier today. And as he mentioned, that'll feature Shauna Erdman of Comcast and Melanie Davis at Ford Motor Company. So be sure to to join us. Anna will be dropping some links in the chat as well as in LinkedIn Live and YouTube. One more reminder to subscribe to Your Brain at Work, the podcast. There will also be a link for that where you can see all of season 1 and these recordings that become episodes for season 2. You can also stay up to date with our upcoming webinars, not just these Fridays at noon. We do product demos, lots of things on the science, the research that's going on right now as things continue to unfold. So that's a great way to stay up to date. These are global. They're not just North America based. So you can see what our offices in EMEA and APAC are doing as well. Otherwise, that concludes our session for today. On behalf of the NLI team and our panelists, we wish you continued safety and good health during these challenging times and hope to see you again next week. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.